The glass doors of the premium private banking wing were heavy, but not nearly as heavy as the silence that greeted Arthur Pendelton when the branch manager slid his identification card back across the mahogany desk. It was a polite, clinical rejection, the kind delivered with a practiced smile that didn't reach the eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pendelton," the manager said, his voice dripping with an artificial, corporate sympathy that felt more like an insult than an apology. "Based on our comprehensive internal screening and a direct mandate from our Risk Assessment Committee, we are unable to approve the opening of an account with our institution. The decision is final, and unfortunately, we are not at liberty to disclose the specific metrics used in this evaluation." Arthur looked down at the plastic card. He was 72 years old, wearing his only tailored suit, a charcoal wool blend that smelled faintly of cedar and old memories, and he was being treated like a ghost in a system he had helped build. He wasn't a criminal, he wasn't bankrupt, and he certainly wasn't a risk. In fact, until 48 hours ago, Arthur believed he was one of the few people left who still understood the true value of a promise. But the modern financial system didn't care about promises, it cared about algorithms, and according to the digital gatekeepers of this sleek, high-rise sanctuary, Arthur Pendelton simply did not fit the equation. What the branch manager didn't know, however, was that Arthur wasn't there to beg for a checking account or to plead for a standard line of credit. Arthur was there because of a deeply buried, decades-old secret, a piece of paper currently resting in the inner breast pocket of his jacket that possessed the sudden, terrifying power to upend the entire corporate structure of the multi-billion-dollar banking conglomerate. The friction had started 3 weeks prior, when Arthur received a notice in the mail stating that his modest, neighborhood bank of 45 years had been officially acquired by Global Horizon Trust, a multinational financial leviathan. Along with the acquisition came a mandatory migration of all existing personal assets. But when Arthur attempted to log into the new portal, his access was blocked. When he called the helpline, he was transferred through a labyrinth of automated voices before being told to visit a premier branch in person. Now, sitting in this overcooled office, he realized this wasn't a technical glitch, it was a deliberate erasure. The bank was systematically purging older, low-yield accounts from their ledger to maximize profit margins for the upcoming fiscal quarter, masking the algorithmic eviction behind vague compliance terminology. The manager, a young man named Julian whose immaculate hair and sharp watch suggested he had never known a day of physical labor, stood up to signal the end of the meeting. "If you'll excuse me, Mr. Pendelton, I have a regional compliance call." But Arthur didn't move. Instead, he reached slowly into his coat, his hand brushing against the fabric of history, and pulled out an elongated, yellow document encased in a protective plastic sleeve. The paper was fragile, its edges slightly frayed, bearing the elegant, handwritten cursive of a bygone era, stamped with a deep indigo wax seal from 1974. Arthur placed the document precisely in the center of the mahogany desk, right over the bank's glossy promotional brochures. "Before you ask me to leave, Julian," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a calm, resonant register that commanded the room, "I suggest you look up ledger entry 42-B from the municipal archives of the original Citizens and Traders Bank of 1974. Julian frowned, glancing impatiently at his watch. "Sir, as I explained, our digital records only migrate back to—" "I didn't say digital." Arthur interrupted gently. "I said archives. The physical vault in the basement of your regional headquarters, which your parent company legally absorbed along with all outstanding liabilities, debts, and covenants." Julian hesitated, his corporate veneer cracking just enough to reveal a flicker of curiosity, mixed with irritation. He pulled his keyboard closer and typed in a series of administrative override codes, navigating to the deep-tier legal acquisition registry of the bank's founding entities. As the screen buffered, Arthur leaned back, his mind drifting back to a rainy Tuesday 52 years ago. In 1974, Arthur was a young surveyor helping clear the land for what would become the very foundation of this city's commercial district. The founder of Citizens and Traders Bank, a desperate but visionary man named Thomas Sterling, faced sudden ruin when his primary investors backed out mid-construction. Arthur, who had just inherited a modest sum from his grandfather's farm, did something entirely uncalculated by modern standards. He signed over every single penny to Sterling on a handshake and a formal, handwritten promissory note to keep the crane moving. It wasn't a standard loan, it was a foundational equity bond, structured with a compounding clause meant to safeguard a young man's future. For decades, Arthur forgot about the absolute scope of that paper, content with his quiet life, until the bank's cold rejection forced him to dig through his attic. The monitor on Julian's desk flashed a sharp amber alert, a rare data exception code that the young manager had clearly never seen before. Julian's eyes widened as line after line of legal text populated the screen, detailing a mandatory corporate succession clause linked directly to the physical document on the desk. The algorithm hadn't just rejected Arthur, it had flagged an active, unamortized sovereign debt liability that the bank legally owed him. The color drained from Julian's face so fast it looked as if the air had been vacuumed directly out of the office. He looked from the screen to the yellowed paper, his fingers hovering over the keyboard like he was afraid the keys might shock him. This can't be accurate, Julian whispered, his corporate confidence completely evaporating. The system is calculating an exponential compounding interest yield over a 52-year dormancy period, pegged against the original land value of the Central District. Arthur remained perfectly still, a quiet dignity radiating from his posture. It is entirely accurate, young man. When Thomas Sterling built this institution, he didn't just borrow money, he legally bound the future assets of this bank to the growth of the land it sits on. Every time this building expanded, every time your company acquired another local branch, the valuation adjusted. Julian frantically picked up his desk phone, dialing an internal emergency line to the legal department, his voice cracking as he tried to explain to a senior vice president that a gentleman in a charcoal suit was currently sitting in Office 3 with a document that technically made him one of the largest individual stakeholders of the entire regional asset pool. The open loop hanging in the tense air of the room was no longer whether Arthur would get his simple checking account, but rather how far the bank would go to suppress a legal paper that could trigger a massive corporate restructuring if it ever reached the press or the federal regulatory boards. Imagine standing in front of a massive machine that has spent years telling you that you don't matter, only to realize you hold the exact key that can turn the entire machine off. If you've ever felt completely invisible to a major company, a bank, or a billing system that treats you like a number rather than a human being, smash that like button right now and leave a comment below with the word justice. Let's see how many of us have had to fight against a faceless system just to get what we deserve. Arthur's story isn't just about a piece of paper. It's about the exact moment the little guy forces the giant to look him in the eye. What do you think the bank's legal team is going to do next? Will they try to buy Arthur off with a quick settlement, or will they use their massive resources to try and prove this 52-year-old document is a forgery? Drop your predictions in the comments right now before we reveal the shocking resolution of Arthur's meeting with the board. Before we look at the breathtaking climax where the CEO of Global Horizon Trust has to personally step into this branch, make sure you are subscribed to the channel with notifications turned on. We uncover the incredible, hidden true stories of history and finance that the big institutions would rather keep buried in the dark archives forever. You don't want to miss our upcoming investigative video on the lost safety deposit boxes of 1929, so hit that subscribe button right now and join our growing community of truth seekers.